Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading video for Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. I am running late in more ways than one with reading and videoing and all of that, but hopefully I can just quickly get through what I want to get through, some of my latest reads for BookTube. I'll start with a short story from a literary magazine. I am currently reading from Boulevard, numbers 107 and 108, which are from 2021. I read Burning House by Larson. It is a very short piece about a granddaughter named Tara who is at her grandmother Maugie's funeral. Tara is about 17 years old. She seems to have a lot of family in attendance with her, and so many people at Maugie's funeral that some folks, like her boyfriend, are sitting in folding chairs like in the extra area. So Tara is listening to what's going on in the funeral, people talking about Maugie, but mostly she's thinking about Maugie herself and about a game they used to play together that Maugie would ask her those existential questions about, like, you know, picking which way to die, that sort of thing, which seems rather macabre for the setting, but that's what we're going with. Maybe it makes sense that she's thinking about that. She's also thinking about how she is the favored grandchild, even though she has lots of cousins and so forth. And in the order of the service, she's sort of listed as like a secondary pallbearer, although her male cousins are going to be the pallbearers. So she's thinking about that as well. She thinks about her boyfriend, who looks kind of bored when she looks back at him, and she sees him texting, and he's actually texting her to say, well, you know, he's sorry, but he has to leave for work. And she's thinking about, you know, they're having, I guess, a 17-year-old illicit romance somewhere, you know, not basically seems like making out in the dark sort of thing. And she's thinking about how, you know, he couldn't be there for her during this time that obviously hurts her a lot. And then she focuses specifically on one of those, you know, existential games where Maugie asks her, would you risk running out of a burning house naked, or would you stay in the house and perish? And Maugie seemed pretty freaked out when, even after some conditions, Tara decided she'd rather try to save her life. And I'm not sure exactly where we're going with that. In the order of the service, people are talking about Maugie surviving the Great Depression at the same time. I don't know if I'm overthinking. Are these supposed to be related? I guess by this point, I guess I'm just a little unsure about, you know, what the purpose is, except that it's about grief, it's certainly, and about wanting to take your place and be seen. Like, Tara's boyfriend doesn't seem to be seeing her, like their affair seems illicit, and he can't even stay the whole way for the funeral. I mean, she is very young. I don't know what type of relationship this is. And at the end, she does, you know, insist that she will help carry the coffin, even though she doesn't have to. But she's, you know, asserting her place as someone important in Maugie's life, even though her relatives are saying that she's acting dramatic. So that's what this story is about. The other physical book I finished this novel this week is The Bells by Lacey Dunham. I think I talked about it briefly, yes, in my last video, AM reading video. And disclaimer, this was written by someone I was in a writing class with like years and years and years ago. We still live roughly in the same area, in the DC area. She lives in DC and I'm right outside of it. But anyway, what this story is actually about, it is a Southern Gothic. It also has some dark academia feels to it. Most of the action takes place in 1951 and 1952 during that school year, because we are following characters who are college freshmen at this southern small girls' institution university called Bellerton. And the main character we're following is named Dina, and Dina is coming to this really pristine school with some secrets and secret identity stuff. And the first one we learn about is that she is not a woman of means, even though this school is touted as a place of means. And I think even in the first couple pages that I talked about in the last AM reading video, she makes a social gaffe because she's not used to being part of the privileged rich class. But she does ultimately get beyond that, and she makes friends with the 5 other freshman girls living in her dorm, and they're led by Ada May, who has a sort of regal authoritarian personality, and she is descended from founders of the school. And spooky things certainly seem to happen a fair bit on this campus, like during this time period and also in other time periods. And we do move into the future, into 50 years later. I should say that in their freshman year, Bellerton's about to celebrate its centennial anniversary, and then 50 years later, it's the 150th anniversary, and some of our characters are back at Bellerton, and they uncover a skull. And that skull is related to the Bells, which are Dina and her friends. And so we go back to see what did they do, and these were definitely some toxic friends. They policed each other a lot about proper behavior. They could be very abusive to one another, but also in that cloistered, cliquish way of, when you belong, you belong. And then in other places, Dina is seeing a ghost of an antebellum student who disappeared once upon a time and has some information to share there. So there's a lot going on for a relatively short book. It's under 300 pages anyway. And I found myself certainly getting more and more engrossed and trying to figure out what's happening, but there were some, spooky vibes and just sort of innate commentary about the price of fitting in, perhaps, and of conforming to societal norms. And I thought, we were following Dina and also, the 5 other Bells, and I thought the characterization was pretty good. I'm glad she didn't make it bigger. She was thinking about making it a larger group, but I thought we could kind of stick with the characterization of these particular girls pretty well, and just made the whole ride all the more enjoyable. I thought it was largely a win for me. Maybe a couple quibbles here and there, but mostly just glad I read this one. I can say that about my audiobooks as well, but I'm going to start with my least favorite of the two as I wrap up While the Dark Remains by Joanna Ruth Meyer. I did talk about this book briefly in my last Am Reading video, but I don't think I gave a great synopsis of everything that was going on, so I'll try to do that quickly. We are in an epic fantasy world, secondary world, not our world, basically within this province where a few different sort of ethnic groups are fighting it out. I'll start with the Ajaria, who are the magic wielders of the group that used to sort of control the entire province, but then I guess as these other non-magical people started crowding them out, they dug a hole into a mountain to hide a magical weapon and then sort of retreated behind some magical barrier at part of the province. And the other 2 non-magical groups, the Scandins and the Darrens, have been fighting it out ever since. It's like a long-term sort of never-ending land conflict. And our main character is a young woman named Brynja who spent her formative years, she is a Scandin girl, but she was sold to the Darren king as this prodigy. She's this child acrobat, and he keeps her in a cage to perform for, delegates and so forth. And he also has other children with other prodigy skills that he keeps in cages for the same purpose. And she is stuck there for about 10 years, although during that time she learns how to escape her cage, she gets to know some people, gets to know the layout of the land, and particularly gets to know the Crown Prince Ballast, one of many of the king's children, but he's half Eldarian and has some magic, and the king also denigrates him and uses him for magic tricks as well, and there's bad blood there, so she sees them as allies, but he abruptly cuts contact with her and disappears after a while. And as Brynja's growing older, she knows that the king is going to kill her, because he's only interested in child prodigies, and, she's getting to about 18 or something. The Scandin princess is actually also a prisoner, although the Darren king doesn't know who she is, technically. But Brynja is ultimately able to escape and take the Scandin princess with her. They actually meet Ballast in these throughways through the mountain to escape. And then Brynja and the Scaran Princess Saga return to the Scaran homeland. They meet Saga's family. Brynja's family is basically, we don't know where they are. The backstory seems to be that they had hard times, fell on hard times, and that's why they allowed their daughter to join an acrobatic troupe that then sold her, into this slavery, basically, and she hadn't heard from them since. So she becomes sort of an honorary member of the royal family. The prince, Vil, gets very interested in her, and they start concocting a plan, these early 20-somethings, to go to the Darren city, to Nebris, or the mountain, castle where the king is, as a fake delegation to stall for time while their real army sneaks in through, the paths that Brynja and Saga found. And Brynja will be able to spy on the king and his council, like using the way she could go through the ducts that she found about earlier. So there were things that didn't work for me as well, like, they trumped Brynja up as some sort of princess, and I'm like, so she'd be in the king's company where he might recognize her, where it would make more sense, and she maybe would go around more unnoticed if she were a servant, I think. But, the tension is rising, and Brynja is, loyal to the Scandins, to Saga and Vil, and she's also here because she wants to free, the children who are still captive, of course. And there's also other delegates as well, including from a nearby empire, who are there. They're all just, I guess, technically trying to stop the bloodshed. But the Eljarans aren't there because they're behind their magical wall. There's a lot of world building, and Joanna Ruth Meyer, I appreciate her level of world building, although I think at the end of the day, I still think that I didn't understand sort of the systems behind the people. And the king was basically a one-dimensional villain. Like, I just didn't really understand much of his motivations at all, other than being evil. And, we have megalomaniac dictators in the real world, but, they don't usually stay there only based on their own accord. They have people propping them up. But he seemed more like a cartoonish character to me, and I thought that was a shame, especially given that this is Joanna Ruth Meyer moving into adult fantasy from YA. There was also a gotcha moment with Brynja and her story arc where we find out something that, frankly, I think it was used for shock effect, and the way that she did it it doesn't speak to me. It doesn't feel authentic, and then it makes us think of things in ways that, it's good to think of things in ways you hadn't before, but it didn't feel like it was earned. And so that also just, put a bad taste in my mouth as well. But it put us into a new perspective that if I go into the sequel, which might come out in the next couple of years, and I just sort of ignore all of the, hand-wavy gotcha stuff from this book, maybe I can still enjoy the sequel, because overall I do enjoy Joanna Ruth Meyer's writing, although this one definitely is on the lower end for me by a fair bit. And also I actually interacted with Joanna Ruth Meyer during the days of a NaNoWriMo Vidler community, which also was probably like a decade or more ago, because time is going by. And the last book I'll talk about here, also an audiobook, also fantasy, is The Maiden and Her Monster by Maddie Martinez. Like the other two novels I mentioned, this is also a 2025 release, and I'm trying to get through the small handful of those I have left before I can do my mock reads tier ranking blog post. But anyway, yeah, this is me actually reading a tiny bit of front list. And this fantasy is also a Jewish coded fantasy, so I try to get to a fair amount of those, particularly ones that fit the epic fantasy secondary world milieu, which I tend to like that milieu anyway. And in my last video, which I was talking about my fantasy mock reads picks, I talked about how this is very similar to another famous Jewish coded fantasy story that came out a few years ago called The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed, and she's since gone on to publish more fantasy. I don't think any Jewish coded, but she's, I think, relatively popular in that sort of fantasy space. And so I wonder if Maddie Martinez will follow a similar trajectory, because this story is very similar in a lot of ways to The Wolf and the Woodsman. And the general breakdown is we are in a central slash Eastern inspired medieval location of Europe, but not Europe, but based off of that. And we're at a small Yahudi village near the forest, and the Yahudi is the coded Jewish characters. Our main character is Malka. She's about 23 years old, and she lives with her mother, who's a healer, and younger sisters. Her father has turned into a bit of a bitter alcoholic, in part because he and the men have been fighting monsters in the woods that appeared recently. And the monsters have been killing young women, including Malka's best friend. And on top of that, they're not going into the woods, which is where sometimes they collect herbs and other necessary items for survival, especially the mother with the healing. And they live in a country that is, ruled by a church, and the church demands tithes from, so-called outsiders like the Yahudi. So these groups of emissaries from the church are coming in with increased frequency to demand tribute that they don't have. The Yahudis don't have the resources that the church is demanding, but the church, is clunking down an iron fist and just responding with violence and xenophobia. And they stay a while, this particular group in the current timeline, waiting for, the Yahudi to be able to accrue the tithes. And during that stay, one of their own is killed by the monsters in the woods. But the church people decide, they don't believe in the monsters. They decide to blame it on the Yahudi using anti-Semitic tropes, like, you kill our people to, bake their blood into your sacrifices sort of stuff. And so they blame Malka's mother, who went into the woods to gather some supplies. And Malka is desperate to save her mother's life, so she makes a crazy gambit to go with her friend Amnon into the woods to try to capture this monster. And instead, they come across the female golem named Nimra. And Nimra is not the monster, although it seems like perhaps she's been calling the monsters to her. She's been chained to this forest by the Maharal, which is the name of the rabbi who created her. And this might be a good time to say that this part of the story is based on a legend that takes place in 16th century Prague, where the Maharal, the rabbi there, creates a golem, which is a being out of clay to serve the Jewish community and try to save them from anti-Semitic attacks. And that was the purpose of this golem, Nimra. But it seems like she went berserk and killed a couple people, and so he banished her, and then the church blamed this rabbi also for killing another, church lady, somebody from their faith. And so Nimra wants to go to the capital city where the rabbi is being held to help save him. And Malka wants a monster to bring back to her village to save her mom. So they strike a deal that Malka will perform the magic necessary so that they can go to the capital city to save the Maharal. And then they'll come back to the village so Nimra can sacrifice herself and save Malka's mother. So that's their plan. And then it turns into an enemies to lovers story between the two of them. And there's, feelings that come out and that are further helped along by the fact they now have this magical bond between the two of them, linking human and golem. They go into the capital city and they learn a lot more about the complicated politics of what the church is really up to and how they're trying to cement their rule, and also how particularly the nobles are utilizing the church and utilizing this authoritarianism to cement their rule in the country and to use the Yahudi as scapegoats, basically, for all of the troubles that they're having, like a plague and other things like that. And so Malka and Nimra and all of them kind of get embroiled in that, and even, get entangled with the people at the top in their desperate attempt to save the Maharal. And this is where Malka's supposed to come to terms with the fact that she's no longer, a village girl who doesn't have to think about these things, but she has to make a stand for her people and ask, what it takes to, ensure that they have a good life in this sort of environment where there's so much danger. And I really liked it. Plot-wise, I thought that it moved really quickly and was engaging. Sometimes the writing was pretentious, but and also I was listening to it on audio, but mostly it flowed well. I do think that the political stuff, which fascinated me, still it was mostly predominantly exposition, which really slowed us down. And I think there was a marketing issue with this book as well, where readers were hoping there'd be more of a spooky vibe and that we'd stay in the forest, and that's not really what happened. It's also not what happened in The Wolf and the Woodsman. Those characters also leave the spooky forest and go into, a bigger city and interact with politics, but I think there's more spookiness in the forest, and then there is, I think, more direct contact, like one of the main characters actually is part of the royalty there, so the politics didn't feel quite as removed from the main characters and their personal experiences. I would also say that, and this is a hard sell for me, some people go into fantasy or romantasy for romance, obviously. Like, this is a sapphic romance between a female golem and the female main character, and it feels like it's going off of the enemies to lovers vibes, but I couldn't get past the fact that, they're not equals. Their whole relationship is predicated on the fact that Nimra's has accepted sacrificing herself, sacrificing her life, which is just inherently unequal. And Malka actually gets angry with her if, for not holding up the end of the bargain, when she thinks occasionally that Nimra isn't holding up that end of the bargain. So there's something about it that just doesn't sit well for me. I think for people who are chasing certain vibes, maybe this would work, but that's not, when I want to read about, relationships and romance, that's not the types of, characterization I'm really interested in. There was, a lot of interesting perspectives on Jewish mysticism. There was certainly more Jewish content, I think, in this book than in The Wolf and the Woodsman. And I also think this main character, she felt more authentic to the sort of society that Martinez was building up, whereas the main character in Ava Reed's was more of a 21st century mean girl. That's just my take. I do think there was a lot to enjoy in this book, and there were some things that I think I could quibble about a bit. I also think some of the gore got a little excessive, I think, as well. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with the message that Martinez has either, how she's interpreting or extrapolating the Golem story, and how she seems to, well, her characters say they lean towards violence in the name of protection, but actually Nimra doesn't really use violence that much unless she's forced to, or unless it's like really liminal cases of self-defense. So there's that. But I would still say the actual, well, not the actual, because, it was written down in the 19th century and there were legends all before that, and it's based off of even more ancient sources. But in general, I think the Golem tends to be a cautionary tale about violence getting out of hand. But that might also be my own bias and what I'm trying to do in my own Jewish coded fantasy novel and the messages I'm trying to say, which who knows how they'll turn out. At least Martinez made it through all of the drafting and the editing and the publication, and we'll see where she goes from here. And that about covers it for me now. We are now into the tail end of October, so I hope to squeeze in my book haul, my small little book haul for October in the next couple of days, so stay tuned for that. I hope those of you who are reading for, reading goals like I am with these 2025 releases are enjoying what you're reading. I'd be curious to know what speaks to you in different genres like Southern Gothic and Dark Academia, or Enemies to Lovers and Romantasy and all that sort of stuff. And well, other than that, thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.